Entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so that you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't. My name is Ashkan Karbas-Fushan, founder and CEO of WatchMojo, and in this interview series, we sit down and talk to the men and women who stand in the arena and discuss the struggles, setbacks, and eventual successes they experience as entrepreneurs. In my many years running WatchMojo, I've spent more time in New York than in any other city, making friends with some of the most talented hustlers and builders in town. While New York City grew into the capital of finance and media by the late 20th century, home to some of the world's largest corporations, the city has also served home to some of the greatest entrepreneurs the world's ever known. Indeed, in the 21st century, in the wake of back-to-back shocks to the financial world, Manhattan has seen a slow but steady shift back to its entrepreneurial roots, showcasing the vision, drive, execution, and persistence required to succeed. So we sat down a couple years ago at the Ace Hotel, and you took me through this concept you had for this new company. You were telling me about like this concept you had in travel, and if you fast forward now, it's probably been 5 years, 6 years? How long?
Yeah, 5.5 years as a company, yeah.
So tell me, from then to now, how did Skift go from concept to reality?
Doing stuff every day. I mean, the concept is not rocket science. What I explained to you then, media is not rocket science in general. It's been my philosophy forever. People try and make it rocket science. It's just not. It's simple. Cover a sector to the best you can, and you sell an audience. Either you sell the audience or you sell to the audience. So it's either advertising or subscriptions or variations of those. So my first media companies, I've known you obviously for 15 years at this point, and my first media company, which is a blog media company that turned into a media company, and we built and sold it, as you know. The second one was a more planned one. The first one was an accidental. I was a blogger that turned into, you know, the whole story, that turned into a media company. I would say we would have had to try really hard to like completely fail in the business, because media, if you know how to do it, it's not, as I said, not rocket science. The extent to which we have taken over the industry, the lingo, we've become the lingo in the travel industry. One of the first decks that I created, which was really just a text essay of sorts back in 2011, I would say, had this line, we would like to, something along the lines that we would like to be the lingo of the travel industry. Turns out we have, by many ways you can look at it. And, you know, one of the ways we look at it is, does the larger media that covers the business of travel look at us as the main source at which they try and understand the industry? So certainly 2017 was a breakthrough year in terms of larger media looking to us to understand the business of travel. Yeah, so in many ways, I think we knew we were going to do well. We just realized how much of a share of voice we would have in terms of the big CEOs and CMOs in travel. It's completely sort of fanatical about our brand. I've been in media for 20 years at this point. The reader relationship with media, I know what it is. Like, we either read the Times or we get this newsletter, sure. But the relationship that we have with a lot of our people who read us in the travel industry is very fan-based, which is incredible. Like, how much more, what more can you ask from people? Some elements you can remember from the paid content days. People are fanatical about what we did. I think Skift has taken it to a whole different level. So that's very gratifying to see, even though, you know, the business of media is as hard as it gets.
Okay, so you mentioned paid content. I mean, that was the pioneer of pioneers in the space before TechCrunch, before Business Insider, and all of those. Take us a little bit through, you said you were the accidental like entrepreneur blogger,
yeah.
You turned into a media company. Like, just origins briefly, like when did you start it, and when did you say, oh, I got a business on my hands,
yeah.
and when are you going to focus on it exclusively?
Yeah, so I grew up in between UK, India, and US. My family is an academic family. I don't think anybody in our extended family had any kind of business inclination. It's all a family of academics, usually. Most of them doctors, engineers too. And so when I went to school in India, I was going to become a computer engineer, which is what my family wanted me to do. I sort of lost interest midway. So then I wanted to go into advertising copywriting, which was the good part about my family is they forced me once to do this, and then they never forced me after. So they let me do anything after. And then obviously supported me ever since then. From advertising copywriting, which I didn't really get into, I went to the PR. This was back in India. Got exposed to the media side. This is what I want to do. Internet was just coming into India. This was 98, 99. The first internet conference happened in India, in Delhi, and my editor said, "Hey, Rafat, aren't you undergrad in computer engineering? Why don't you go and see what this is?" So I got hooked on to covering. So that was like the moment. It must have been, 90 at some time. I got hooked on to. So this is what I want to cover: the business of internet. Then I came to US, applied for journalism schools, 5 or 6 of them. Got rejected by all of them except one. And the story since then is I've gone to all of those schools and spoken at all of those schools, and I've rubbed it in saying, you guys rejected me back then.
I got rejected from McGill Management. I got into the arts program, so I went to Concordia Business School. Mm-hmm. But then I was a lecturer doing at McGill and Concordia. So I didn't rub it in, but it was
I
sweet.
just spoke at Columbia last week, and I was telling them I applied. You guys never gave a shit.
It's funny the things that drive us, but anyway, go on.
Yeah, I think and we can talk about this if you want to, like as an immigrant, certainly, like you have this chip on your shoulder, you have to prove yourself. This is not it's a cliche, but it's true as well. And so part of it was that. And so paid content, I came out of school, came to New York. I came on this weird year between the first internet bubble had burst, but September 11th hadn't happened yet. So it was kind of that weird in-between year where all of us felt things were going to get a lot worse, just we didn't know what it was. And so I worked at a couple of .coms as a internet journalist. Both of them closed down, and then I started this blog as a side project. Early days of blogging, I was blogging as soon as I came to US in 1999. I discovered blogs, and was writing as a Indian guy in Bloomington, Indiana.
How many Indian guys are in Indiana?
Well, back in those days, this is 99, so it was very, very, very white. Like the university was the bastion of diversity, but that 95% white. So you can imagine the rest of the town. It's changed a lot now, but still, it was a great experience. I started this blog, just my personal journey as coming into America again. And then when I moved to New York after college, after school, I turned it into a business blog of here's what I can do as a journalist covering this industry. So I think paid content started June 2002. Gawker started August 2002. So we were pioneers. I shouldn't use the word for myself, but since you used it, I'll just use it. In taking the blog model, and we stretched it in the industry B2B news context, and Gawker stretched it in the consumer media context, and created models that other people came and then took and built on top of it. So it wasn't meant to be a company, it was meant to be a glorified resume of here's how I can cover this industry. I was looking for a job after these couple of .coms sort of flamed out, and it grew from there. So I think that the big thing that I tell people, even now in media, if anybody's looking to start something, is like anything that you need to create your media company, everything exists. Almost zero costs. Tools, CMS, back in those days, obviously CMS was just starting. So there's nothing should stop you from starting a media company. It's just, it doesn't require investment, it doesn't require tons of people, it just requires you starting writing.
So you mentioned, a kid who's born in the UK, Indian, moves to the US, you're Muslim, and India is obviously Muslims are the minority. So how does that affect your worldview, especially post 9/11, living in New York? That's a very unique perspective. And it's funny you mentioned the immigrant thing. I didn't see myself as an immigrant. I naively, until I would say probably after 9/11, where I said, hey, I've been in Canada since I was 6, but I am a little bit different type of thing.
Yeah, well, you're also in Canada.
Yes.
So there's that part. A very different. And so I didn't really think of, so the good point you make is I didn't see myself as an immigrant really until I moved to New York and even then after 9/11, much into 9/11 and after that. Muslims are a minority in India, but they're a large minority. I mean, 13% of 1 point, however many billion, is a few hundred million people. So I think I understood. I've been a minority my whole life, obviously here as well. So I've understood the value of sort of proving yourself 5 times over, and I think that I brought with me. Certainly, immigrants bring that, but also as a minority in India, I brought that over. A lot of people had a lot of stories about discrimination in general, anything like that. I've been lucky in general that has nothing big has happened to me that I would say I was discriminated against or anything like that in the U.S. I know obviously there are tons of stories against all kinds of people. The most I've had is used to get stopped at the airport a lot back when I was in LA. I don't anymore. I'm a citizen now. Back then I was a green card holder. So I used to get stopped a lot. I was used to get into the secondary screening and they used to ask all kinds of questions. But I mean, just as an aside, I think things have improved on the immigration front if you're a citizen, even as a Muslim, but obviously I'm sure it's worse for a bunch of other people. And so I've not had any overt cases of discrimination that I would feel. It's just that, and you know this well, it doesn't need to be overt cases of racism. It just needs to be the general environment that messes with your head, and that does the trick. It doesn't have to be you specifically.
No, it's fascinating because, I mean, again, I've known you for so long, but in preparing for this, I researched, and there was an article in a UK publication that said, like, when you travel to the UK even recently, you brought burner phones and burner laptops.
Yeah, so you remember that happened when Trump came in, and it was that they were beginning to search all your laptops and stuff. So I just didn't want to get into this crap, so I bought new laptop and a new phone. I used it on a few trips, and then I sort of eased off, and then now I think that's not happening as much as initially people thought it was going to happen, and it did happen. So you're always aware of these things. I think I would say in the last 3 to 5 months, I've just consciously started to block out. Like, there's only so much your brain can absorb. And so my wife absorbs a lot more than I do. And so I've sort of consciously started blocking all of that stuff. And it's not healthy. What can you do beyond just discuss it and like, oh my God, this is happening or that's happening. So, and one of the things I've always railed against is like the victim mentality. Just like get up and get shit done.
Getting up and getting shit done, I would say, is one way to define an entrepreneur. So I'm curious, you said you came, you were brought up in an academic family, you weren't thinking of going into the business world. What was like the first time like you even heard the word entrepreneur, and what does that mean to you? And like, when was it that you said, oh wait, I am basically an entrepreneur? Yeah,
I mean, so imagine, when I first started the blog, I think startups weren't like cool or anything like that. I don't know if entrepreneur was a word I used until a long time. I would say like 2005, 2006 or 7 is when I 2007 was the peak of my first company. We were doing very well.
In terms of revenue, views,
in terms of revenues, and we did our first conference, if you remember, back at like Beverly Hilton.
I was invited. It was great.
It was like one of the first business conferences on social media.
Wasn't it the economics of social media?
Yes, yeah. So MySpace was the thing then. Facebook was there, just not anything that anybody would care for back then.
And then you followed it up with the future of business media at the Waldorf Astoria.
Almost killed us. Yeah. It was expensive.
I can imagine.
But
what does that cost?
I don't. To be honest, I don't remember now. But we got a lot of room blocks, and turns out a lot of people were local. So we had to actually put the room blocks. This is back in the days of Craigslist. We had to put the rooms on Craigslist for people to buy, to like anybody who wanted to.
Is that legal?
Those rooms. I don't know.
I don't think that's legal, but anyway, that's very entrepreneurial of you.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. So, sorry, what was your question again?
No, it was just more like that. So 2006 or 7, that's when you kind of started to view yourself and refer to yourself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think when we got our first round of funding, so Alan Patrikoff, who founded
The dean
Petrikov
of
Co, the
venture, yeah.
Yeah, so he was investing from the 1950s. He's like 80 something now. He's still daily doing it. It's so much energy. I meet him, I think once or twice a year now, just as somebody I've known for a long time. And he literally I was sitting in my house in LA and sitting on my desk, and I get a call, and it's Alan's office who wanted to talk to me. And he was just starting a new fund, Greycroft, which is now his main vehicle. And he says every time he talks to digital media companies to invest in, they say, oh, they use our name, pay content. So he wanted to talk to me. So I came to New York, met him, took investment from him. I think that was the time that I started looking at us, I don't know, even a startup, just as an entrepreneur. Because startup comes with this is a thread in my life. Startup comes with a lot of baggage. I'm a very anti startup scene type thing.
Scenesters.
Scenesters is a term I use a lot.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, and keeping your head down and doing shit. Back in the days, everybody used to know me in the startup scene. When I first started Skift and started going to some of the startup events early on, and I realized nobody here knows me, and they're all young, obviously a lot. So I stopped going, and I certainly don't go at this point.
Do you think that now there's so much hype and you call it the entrepreneurs, is this going to just get bigger and bigger in your opinion, or do you think because education's role, not its value, but its role and need to have a degree has changed? Look at the Mark Zuckerbergs at the extreme, who don't even finish school. Do you think this is just going to continue because all these tools are available and kids are so savvy that they launch stuff, or do you think it's a bubble of sorts and eventually I
do think that something has changed. I don't know if it's all for worse. I do think that, especially if you look just outside US or Western world, the fact that in countries where governments or large companies put a lot of barriers to people creating their own lives, being entrepreneurial, for instance in India, being an entrepreneur was not a thing that was looked upon as anything good, or working for a startup was not a thing. Now the culture is completely changed. Now it's probably too much of a fad. Somewhere there'll be a middle. Obviously, this is a phase. I think it will sort of even out in the long run. But the fact that the young people have bigger ambitions in life beyond just working for a company, I think in general is a good thing. I just think that there's only a certain amount of people that can start companies, have a certain temperament. As somebody who hires people, it becomes harder if everybody wants to do their own company, obviously, as you know very well. So the hiring becomes long-term, net becomes more difficult in this environment where that is a bubble. The best thing about bubble bursting is the fact that people's expectations get lower. So then the cost of running a company get a lot cheaper.
Yeah, I feel like when the hype leaves the market, historically our businesses come out stronger because you're not doing boneheaded moves because everybody else is doing it, so your team is asking for you to jump off the bridge like others. So it's kind of, I don't like to see the loss of jobs. You never want to see that stuff. Of course. But you do want to see just a little bit more, cooler heads prevail. Take us through the decision to sell your first startup. Because, it's your baby, right? You've raised venture capital. I understand there's an expectation of a liquidity event. How did that come to be? And why and how The Guardian?
Yeah, so we were out raising our second round. This was 2008. And we were, I think, raising 4 million or something, which was still small back in the days, but used to be that. And we were talking to a bunch of VCs, but a bunch of media companies as well. And I don't think we ever talked to them about the venture investment. They may just have heard, if I'm not mistaken. And then we had signed a term sheet with a VC firm back in LA, a binding term sheet, and then they came in, which was painful because we had to break that binding term sheet. We had to pay them money for having put in zero money at the end of the day later.
Do you mind sharing what the breakup fee was?
No. Yes, I do mind.
Okay, that's
what I'm telling you that, no. But it was a few $100,000 for zero effort put in. The legal fees, they must have spent some money there. But it was a few $100,000 that was directly out of my pocket, so it came out of my share of the things. I had to go beg to the VC of why I wanted to. So the reason I have an answer to that is I told the answer why I wanted to sell to the VC that I had to break up with, which was that they were investing money at a pretty high valuation for what we were back then. for us to then give them returns, I'd been doing paid content for 6 years at that point. For us to give them returns would have been another 4, 5, 6, 7 years to like hustle. And this was before the crash. So we sold, the deal closed in July 2008. We were talking to them early in that year. So for us to give them returns would have taken another 4 or 5 years, and I was tired.
But you had a big team by then, not just Stacy, but I mean, it was no longer a one-man.
Yeah, Stacy Kramer is executive editor, almost a co-founder. About 25 people at our peak. And it was hard. I mean, competitors had started coming. Everybody started covering the business of digital media.
Yeah, there was TechCrunch already. There was,
and, whatever Recode used to be called, and All Things D that came in, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Everybody picked up their game. So competition was a lot more. And so we just decided it was going to be too much work to try and give returns to the company, to the venture firm. In hindsight, the crash came, so we would have been slashed and burned totally after that. Guardian bought us. They were laying off hundreds of people back home like a few months after. So they did slash and burn us as a result, but we certainly survived. So I had a 2-year lockup. I was there for about 1.5 years. They said, go.
Were you burnt out, or just because of they were laying people off anyway?
Both. I was burnt out, and that there was no path forward for the company. We were cut from 25 to 11 people. So we were a tiny company to begin with. It was just cut to the bone. We had tons of plans of building all kinds of stuff in the U.S. Just didn't happen. So, in hindsight, I learned tons in terms of certainly negotiation as you now sell a company, not to have a personality-based company. A lot of these have obviously, as you know, have flamed out in the past in media. And so with Skift, while certainly I'm a big part of the brand of Skift, long term my goal is to make myself useless. Hopefully we're on our way to do that. Certainly the company's changed a lot in the last year. We're 50 people now as a company, so certainly double the size of my previous company, both in revenues as well as in terms of people. Last year has been a big transition year for me, from being a very organic, we're all in the room, let's get this done, to being the boss, which is a weird feeling. I mean, you understand this. Like the fact that when you enter a room now, you're treated as a boss versus a colleague or somebody doing all this stuff. So that's been a change for me. I can't just walk up to somebody and stand behind them and like it's all fine. Like, why is Rafat standing here? So that has been a change. I'm trying to, a lot of people say, oh, this is your second company, so you must know. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm learning all these things for the first time. And I have a coach now that's helping me think through a lot of things. I don't know if I can say that.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think, it's not a secret or anything. It's just that I don't know if I have asked him if I can disclose his name.
All good.
But it's been very helpful. Coaching, like CEO type coaching, has been very helpful. I would highly recommend. I thought about it for years. I've asked other people. They've always told me it was helpful. I just couldn't see how it was going to be, and then turned out it was really helpful.
We were having a conversation where we were not, we were never actively looking to fundraise. We've never raised money, but there was an investor that was just getting to know us a bit more, and he brought that up. He was like, I'm curious if you'd be open to coaching. I said, of course. And I think...
Oh, you coaching?
No, and I said, no, to be coached. I said, of course. I'm learning every day. I ask questions. Yeah. I go, I'm pretty sure if I say no, that's a big red flag. Like, no, I'm not open to coach. So, no, I can imagine it being valuable. You also have a board.
We don't have a board.
You don't have a board?
No.
There's no formal board of advisors?
No.
How
there's
come?
There's not a board per se. We've raised about $3 million since we started. There's a journey that's pretty well known for people in the media industry, that we initially raised money. We're going to raise subsequent rounds. Didn't happen, and we decided to just focus on bootstrapping from there, which was the best decision we made, obviously.
Why? I don't disagree, because we never raised any, but why would you say that?
Well, I mean, I could either be focused externally or I could be focused internally, and we can set our own path. the Series A that we were trying to raise, this was seed we raised initially, was based a lot on what the investors wanted to hear versus what we should actually have been building. Because
Such
they
as?
want to hear scale.
Yeah.
So we were we were showing them promises of building a data service that, because media, as you very well know, not tons in favor, at least it goes in cycles. And we were certainly a small company, not like BuzzFeed type. So we were giving them promises that we're going to build these data services that are going to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in long term. Did we know what we were talking about? No. Which I'm glad that the VCs saw through to some extent, I suppose, and didn't fund. It was certainly disappointing. Like, this is early 2014. Certainly the most low moment in my professional career, the fact that I am a known entity who everybody knows, I know all the VCs, and was not able to raise money, was really humbling. And then there was a seminal moment where we took our team to Iceland in 2014, our first annual retreat. We do these because we're in travel. We take our whole team into...
you came to Montreal.
Montreal last year, yeah. And so we've been to Iceland, Colombia, Cuba, and Montreal, Canada. Somehow all these seas we do. And this trip in Iceland was meant to be a celebration of us closing our round, because we booked it months ago. Ended up being a bonding on, shit, we have 3 months of money left, and we better figure out how to bootstrap from here. We'd already booked, so we can't have cancel that. It wasn't tons of money, that's the honest answer. We stayed in hostels, like there were like 5 people staying in a single room type. So that was seminal for us. And essentially, for us, cash flow became the biggest thing. I mean, you know this very well, having run a bootstrap company. As an Indian, I understand cash flow. Like, how much money is in the bank and what can I do with that money? And as long as there's enough money in the bank, I'm safe. And so I think that mentality, to some extent, having a simple-minded mentality of how much cash is in the bank, has served us well. Going ahead, it has to expand more from just that. But luckily, I've had a great CFO. My CFO in my previous company, Michael Kniff, he's also the CFO here. So he's the money brain in terms of managing the cash flow very well.
It's funny you mentioned the humbling part. I remember, now obviously we do get interest, but I got turned down probably 100 times because VCs were not into content. And I remember when you were paid content, I would try to get coverage, and you're like, "Have you raised capital?" I'm like, "No." You're like, "Okay, get back to us when you have."
Yeah, I regret that a little bit, but
it's fine. It's all good. I understand. So one thing I want to touch about is New York in particular has exploded, and and then you were in LA for a while.
I was in LA for a while.
LA has exploded. So I just want to get your sense. I mean, obviously these are 2 great cities, very different. Mm-hmm. How does each city's DNA, culture, makeup affect the startup scene, as much as we hate that word, but basically the startups that have grown out of it?
Yeah, I mean, from a media, so I know media, I may not know tons about the other tech startups, but media is a lot easier to do in New York, even though the talent is a lot more expensive. It's just there's a lot of available talent, so that helps a lot. In LA, when I was starting, it was still the early days of the scene that it is now. So if you are, all the cliches are correct. If you are an entertainment type company, or even e-commerce has now become a big thing in LA, there's enough available talent. Commuting and everything still is hard there, so there's still that big an issue. Paid content, had we been in New York all along, we would have been much further along as a business. I truly believe that.
Yeah,
probably. With Skift, there was a point in time where, before I got married, there's potentially I would have moved to DC. But if I was in DC, our company would have been much smaller. This is before we started Skift. So I think New York just leapfrogs from that perspective. The good part about travel is there's no one big hub city in the U.S. that can say this is the capital of travel. And why would you consider
DC? Just for government regulatory?
Well, I was just looking at this as between my first and second company. I was trying to think of a change of life, if you will. There's no big thought behind it. It was just a change of life.
No, I thought maybe for government, but it's not. Yeah.
No, it's one of those. But I'm glad I didn't. So yeah, I think that New York, it's more connected to the rest of the world, which travel by nature of what we do, we need to be. So LA would have been more isolating had we been in LA, or San Francisco even. Like Silicon Valley has never entered in my scope of ever going and living there. Too much of a monoculture. And not from like ethnicity type perspective. It's just everybody talks. Like the thing I say about San Francisco, you walk down the street and oh, that person, I think I know that person. Oh wait, that looks like exactly that, because exact same dress, they probably talk the same, walk the same, etc., etc. You go into a coffee shop, half the people I think you would assume you know. So the
good thing about New York is also there's so many different industries, unlike LA and San Fran, that you could be a super successful Wall Street guy, but then there's a more successful fashion designer who's got the penthouse. So it's kind of really humbling, because there's always more interesting people at the table that do something so different, and then you start to expand your horizons and talk about other stuff instead of just like, hey, did you see Snapchat's latest feature? Oh my God, you know?
Yeah, it's a very, so that's why it never entered. My people say, Rafat, when do you, like people from Silicon Valley that come to New York and we meet and say, hey, Rafat, when are you coming next there? I said, I don't know, I don't think I'm going to come anytime soon. So, which, you know, whatever.
I like San Francisco as a city, but it's true. Whenever I leave on a flight from LaGuardia to go back to Montreal, there's this kind of like almost melancholy where I'm like, oh, I love New York. When am I going to come back, even though I'm here all the time? I've never left San Francisco with that sadness. As much as I'm like, okay, it's fun, there's good stuff here, it's a beautiful city, I'm never like, oh, I'm sad to be leaving San Fran. It's like, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm sure the San Francisco viewers of this show are going to love that. So you're extremely outspoken. Like people earlier in the series, we interviewed Rich from Complex, and he goes, I'm watching some of these new videos you're doing, and he goes, you just don't seem to care. You just talk about stuff. He's like, you don't share confidential info, but it's like you're pretty transparent. I'm like, that's the way I am, and that's the value to the viewer because I'm in the industry. You, I find, are even more out there saying what's on your mind, which is great. Do you ever have either an investor or, like, let's say if you had a board, do you ever get somebody like pinging you saying, hey, why did you say that? Or they wouldn't even dare because you tell them off?
I think it's probably in the latter. Like why? But it honestly hasn't been an issue while I am out there. It's all thought out. I'm not reacting for the sake of reacting. I've pulled back a lot just in the last few months, by the way.
I can imagine with what's gone on, you probably would have a lot more to say, but you also, people don't, I mean, you don't want to dance on anybody's grave, so to speak. So
yeah, but the reality is I've been wrong in pretty much everything in my life, but the one thing I've been right on is media. Like, you can see everything I've said over the last 15 years in terms of picking a focus, going deep in it, building your own brand, not depending on platforms, et cetera, whatever they used to be called a while ago. In many cases, almost all of the things I've believed in have been proven true. I can't be right in everything in life, but in media, this is what I live and breathe. I feel like I have an instinctive sense of what works, what doesn't. I've been right in many cases. So while and so, you know, the proof is there. So I'm sure I'm outspoken, but you know, I'm building companies and I understand the market very well, and it's been proven out. So I've been right more times than wrong. So from that perspective, I'm happy about that part. A big part of our brand has been us in general being outspoken. Why should anybody care about a small B2B media company in travel? But they do, turns out, because we've just kept a high profile as a business, as a result of my background, as a result of us being out there, me being out there. So part of it is calculated, like most of it is calculated. Like I understand the game and I know how to play it. And so I think investors, who most of them are sophisticated media people that have invested in our company, they understand the game, and they know that I'm playing it. And so far, we're doing well. I just sent my investor update for 2017 2 days ago to our investors. We send quarterly updates. If we were in trouble, if we're doing bad for years and years and losing tons of money, that would have been a different issue. But as long as I'm doing fine, hey, that's fine.
Where do you want to take the company in a few years?
So we have moved beyond the business of travel into the business of restaurants. We bought this newsletter that we rebranded Skift Table that just has been a year now. So Jason Clampett, who's my co-founder, is the editor. We started this together. He's now fully focused on that, which shows the seriousness of what we're trying to do. And so taking the model of media, research, conferences in travel, and applying it to a very adjacent vertical. Like this is obviously tons of commonalities. To build that. And then a third sector, which I've mentioned before, is I think luxury retail or disposable income retail. It doesn't have to be completely top end. So if you think about it, between travel, dining, and disposable retail, it's where the majority of the consumer disposable income is spent.
Very smart bets.
So if we can be the Bloomberg of, whatever you want to call it, of this very powerful three big sectors with a lot of commonalities, then it's a much bigger story to build. And there's just a lot of synergies between those sectors. I'm not looking to start a vertical company in education or medical or this. I don't know anything about it. What I know is what we know is what we know. And consumer-facing businesses where disposable income is spent, if we can build a non-boring B2B media company that has outsized influence outside of the industries, then I think we've done our job.
When you raised the money, you had initially said that, like, that's it, we're going to bootstrap. I don't know the details, so that's very helpful. But would you consider, like now, or do you think it's better to just be bootstrapped and fund through operations?
Again, if you just read 5 of my tweets, you would get the wrong impression that I hate VCs. I don't. Obviously, as you know, life is a lot beyond what you just read on Twitter. The nuance there is don't raise money for the sake of raising money. Sort of my philosophy has been there. Never say never. I think that this year we're hitting a milestone revenue number for us that will potentially put us in a growth equity type potentially if we wanted to. We would take money if we would want inorganic growth, not organic growth, which is acquire something that would help us build this larger picture that I just told you. Whether on the data side that would plug into our research subscription thing, or a marketing solution that would help the travel industry companies market to the industry well. So not for organic growth. We don't need. Even in inorganic growth, the projections that we have, it's not going to be like we won't raise anything substantial like 7-10 million max if we wanted to.
You mentioned that you decided to buy Skift Table instead of launching it from within.
Yeah, it was a newsletter.
How did you think of that decision?
I'm always on the lookout for talent and something that exists that we can pick up and then acquire, hire 1 or 2 people behind that. So one, we're not big, so we can't do any big acquisition. Much as I would like to, but I'm always on the lookout for talent. We've launched a lot of things on our own. We have 8 different weekly newsletters that are focused on different parts of the travel industry. Obviously, we launched these conferences. We looked at buying a conference early this year, it just didn't work out, and then we said they were expecting too much money, and we might as well just build our own. So. I don't think it's one way or the other. It's opportunistic, as I'm sure you have looked at things as well. As a small company, I think you and I talked about this constraints that served us well. Like I think we were talking, like you can throw either money at it or you can come up with a solution.
Yeah, and then usually you throw the money at it, and then afterwards you still have the same problem. Yes. So you're like, why did we just burn that money? Yep.
So I think that constraints that serve us very well.
My final question is, at your first startup, I don't think you had any kids. Now I think you have a young son. Are you a 24/7 always-on entrepreneur? Do you balance? How do you...
So, not 24/7, but always on, yes. Like your brain is always on. Am I working all the time? No. So it's changed a lot. So he's 3 years old, our son. Just turned 3 last month. And since he was born 2015, at the start of 2015, the company has changed a lot. If you ask anybody in the company, Jason, Dennis, etc., in our company, they will tell you it's a very different, I am very different, hopefully. And I think the company is different. I started leaving at like the ungodly early hour of 5:15. And so the whole company now is structured around a culture where 9:30 to 5:30 has become, and that's actually become a big recruiting tool for us. In New York, in a very competitive media market, if you're telling people you're going to be working from 9:30 to 5:30, no evenings, no weekends ever, exceptions happen.
Yeah, but there's no BS expectation
yes.
that why is anybody here?
Yeah.
It's like let people live their life there. And
So that's been a big recruiting tool for us. So that changed the whole culture of the company. It's very much about let's care about the lives of the people that work first, and they will then give you the goods in that sense. So that's changed quite a bit since we. It's, you know, one thing I've said, like, it's consistency of effort more than the hours you put in. Like, show up daily, put in the effort, go, and that's worked very well for us. It is high pressure, high stress. That's, you know, make no mistake. It's just that it's in that time. So that's changed a lot. One of the things I'm consciously trying to do this year, as this year has started, is to cut out a lot of extraneous noise outside of work and family. I've been trying to do that for a while, since the sun came. Such as, I know you think, social media.
Yeah, no, I wish I want to sometimes throw my phone in a lake and just, why do I care about?
So I'm not there yet. Certainly, you take one step back, half step back, one step forward, half step back, sometimes two steps back, whatever. But I've latched on, and I've completely stopped watching any TV in the evening, video. And I'm only reading. So our son goes to bed, like we're done with dinner at 8 o'clock. Sometimes we watch stuff together, but now I'm focusing a lot on books. So I've been on this phase where I'm only reading since the winter holidays last year, business history books. So American business history over the last century, different parts, whether it's how did LBOs became a thing, how did investment banking become, so just to understand the landscape of the world. And it's just been gratifying. Like I've read 15 books in the last 2.5 months. You just realize if you cut out so much of these things in your life, how much time do you have? So that's been great. And I'm trying to inculcate that to some extent in our company. I can't dictate it, but I'm trying to tell my own experiences of how I'm trying to get off some of this stuff. So I think that's important.
This is actually my final question. You covered all these media companies in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. Then this past 12 months, we've seen the Me Too stuff, which some of it you're like, okay, not surprising. Some of it you're just shocked as a human. You're like, oh my God. Did you hear of these stories when you were covering these media companies when you were at Paid Content? Were you surprised? Because I'm sure you got a lot of stuff in your inbox that you wouldn't cover, but you're like, oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah.
And then what is your take on it as a guy who's, has studied media and now is in New York?
Yeah. I'm not surprised. I mean, I don't think anybody in media entertainment is surprised. Anybody who's been an insider to even, would not be surprised by all of what came out. The extent to which it happened, I guess nobody was expecting. Some of the media executives that have been named for the last, whatever year. And so, I don't know if I firsthand knew, but certainly you see them operate in public forums or parties or events, and it's sort of, you get a sense of, sure, that guy had it coming. I don't think we ever got tons of firsthand information on any of those through our reporting on media. It was certainly a very different time. If it came across us, I don't remember it, but I think it's a necessary cleansing in so many ways. At the end of the day, I, as a immigrant-ish mentality, if you will, I've always fought against privilege as a concept in American life. And I think in many ways, the Me Too movement mirrors just the privilege that men and white men particularly have had. So I see that as the larger battle among other battles. And certainly have fought against that in the media, as you know, and you mentioned The Voice. That's the voice I think I've had, like, fight against unearned privilege in media in general. And I think that's the lens that I'm looking at this at. But it's a time it's a necessary. The fact that there's so much more attention on it changes the whole game from here. So it's, you know, fascinating times.
I say it's like the civil rights movement. It's long overdue. It's going to make changes. And in any case, I just want to congratulate you. I mean, from that day when we sat down and you took me through your vision, I mean, at a day when nobody thinks of brands, nobody thinks of owned and operated, nobody thinks of diversified revenue streams, you guys have really played it well. So
thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
Of course. Thank you.